Folks, I think we'll get started in just a minute. It's good to see everyone. Want to invite everyone to take their seats. And I want to make sure you can sit wherever you want, but we're going to be sitting right here, kind of facing this way, right? So, I know you want it front row. I appreciate it. It's good. Yeah, exactly.
Yes, it is. There is no Hebrew language.
Hi, everybody. Good to see everyone. Good evening. Hello. Tonight we're having a conversation together. And welcome everyone. It's really an honor for me to be sitting and having this conversation with Rabbi Dorff. And in some ways, he's known me longer than I knew myself, than I was aware of myself. And I have to say, you've really been there for me in some pivotal moments and really spectacular moments. And I have to share with them because I have the microphone, so I get that chance. Exactly. So, there's a tradition that a name is given at a naming ceremony with a blessing. And you got to give me that blessing of my name. I know, it worked out well. And the second is that you signed my ketubah at my wedding. And now we get to sit here together.
There you go. Shows you I'm old.
I printed out your bio. But I'm not going to read through it because we could spend the whole evening on it. But I have to ask you, just to start off our conversation, one thing about your bio, which is that the beginning of your bio states that you serve as the rector for AJU. Yeah. And I'm reading this. And I'm looking at all the different things that Rabbi Dorff has done, and I'm just stuck on this question. What is a rector?
Well, it actually means, well, most of the academic language comes from the Catholic Church, right? So you were a professor originally of the faith. That's how it began, right? And the rector was the one who directed the rectory. The rectory is where the priests live, right? And now in academic circles, when that was taken over, it can mean chief academic officer. So the rector at Hebrew University is the chief academic officer, right? At the University of, at the American Jewish University where I work, right? The chief academic officer is the vice president for academic affairs. I used to be chief academic officer, but then I was called provost, if you want another word. So rector now means I'm rabbi of the university. That's what it means. So what it means is that I have to worry, when we had a kitchen, I had to worry about the kashrut of the kitchen and things like that, right? And I'm the chief ordaining officer for our rabbinical students, that kind of thing. And I get called in to ask about all kinds of Jewish stuff. So that's what it means, at least at AJU.
Wonderful. And I think that is a great opening for our conversation, because in a lot of what that says is that you wear a lot of different hats.
Right.
You've really tapped into both the academic side of Jewish learning and non-Jewish learning, and the halachic Jewish legal side of our tradition.
Right. And my most important titles are grandfather, father, and husband, right? And my grandson, my youngest grandchild, is going to be bar mitzvah this Shabbat. So,
Mazal tov. Mazal tov. So tonight we're here just to spend some time together. I thought this was a good way. Put it on our calendars. Now we get, hour and a half. But we're also here to talk about this book. And this book, this gift that you've brought us, Ethics at the Center. And I would love to hear, as we begin, how did this book come to be?
Well, Rabbi Barry Schwartz, who was then the CEO of the Jewish Publication Society, called me and asked me to write this kind of a book. There is a Scholar of Distinction series that JPS has had for 40 years or something like that. And he asked me to write a book in this series. And first of all, I felt really embarrassed. I mean, Scholar of Distinction, come on. But aside from that, I mean, I'd written a lot of books already, maybe enough, right? But it took a year. He finally convinced me. And what convinced me was that what he really wanted was a kind of retrospect in terms of all of the things that I've done and written, and try to put together what was really most important in terms of what I thought, well, at least what I thought was most important in my academic career. And in my career in working for various government agencies and Jewish Family Service and things like that, and Ramah. So one of the things that ultimately convinced me, and so that's what ultimately led to this. And the reason why it's called Ethics at the Center is because from the time, one of the things, I started going to Ramah when I was 12 years old, Camp Ramah in Wisconsin, because I come from Milwaukee, right? And what I loved about it from the very beginning, I loved a lot of things about it. One was that the simple joy of it, right? We were singing, we were dancing, we were putting on plays, we were playing sports in Hebrew, I mean, all this stuff, right? It was just really fun. But the other part of it that I really loved was the serious discussions we had, far more serious than any of the discussions I had with my friends back in the city. And a lot of those discussions were about moral issues. So it was really interesting to, that's what sort of piqued my interest in this, but not completely so. I mean, one of the things that really made me, well, in order to go back to camp, you had to be taking at least 6 hours a week of Jewish studies during the year. So that meant that I couldn't quit after my bar mitzvah the way most of my friends did, right? And it also meant that when I was 15, I was back at camp, and the director of the camp at the time, Rabbi David McGillner, Aloha Shalom, had a series of sessions with us on Monday nights, for some reason I remember, those of us who were 15 and 16-year-olds. And he started out by saying, how many of you keep kosher at home and out? And a certain number of people raised their hands. How many don't keep kosher at all? A certain number of people raised their hands. How many keep kosher at home but not out, which is what my family did. And he said, it's you people I don't understand. Right? Because we were inconsistent. And then he was on the attack. I mean, he was basically saying, why would anybody in his or her right mind do any of these Jewish things or believe any of these Jewish things? Which I now understand to be a terrific educational technique with teenagers. Because what it did was it required us to defend the tradition rather than the other way around, right? And it also showed me, I mean, this was a rabbi, after all, who was really committed to this Jewish stuff. And he was not only willing, he was actually eager to ask all of these questions that would completely overturn the apple cart. I mean, it started out with concrete things like kashrut and Shabbat, and then later in the summer it was more abstract things like revelation and prayer and God, right? And I don't remember any of the answers that anybody gave, but what really impressed me was that he showed me that you didn't have to close your mind in order to be seriously Jewish. That quite the opposite. It was not just a matter of, it is a matter of tradition and family and community, but it is also a matter of deep intellectual thought. And you need to know that that's who I am. Later I did an undergraduate degree in philosophy and then did a doctorate in philosophy. And one of my graduate professors said, a philosopher is a 5-year-old child who never stopped asking why. That's who I am, right? And so it was after that summer that I started putting on tefillin every morning and keeping kosher out as well as in, which, by the way, in Milwaukee was really hard. There were no kosher restaurants whatsoever. And kosher had to mean, if I was going to have any kind of social life, had to mean you could eat vegetarian out, you just wouldn't eat meat out, right? And it was, and I started observing Shabbat, which again, is not a way to win friends and influence people, right? Because it meant that I couldn't go to the Friday night basketball games with a lot of my friends. And on Saturday night, if we went to a movie or something like that, and then went out to eat, the new place in town was Big Boy. I don't know if you know what Big Boy is, cheeseburgers, right? But I didn't get a cheeseburger. I got a fish sandwich or a salad or something stupid like that. My non-Jewish friends thought it was cool because I had principles. My Jewish friends thought it was medieval, but it was. And you have to understand, I was really active in all kinds of things. I was president of a whole variety of different things. And so my friends were my friends despite this stuff, not because of this stuff, right? But it was largely because Ramah had shown me that you could really punch the tradition and it would punch you back, right? That you didn't have to worry about losing the things that you really valued in the tradition, when you asked these kinds of questions. So that's what really got me involved in all of these things. And then the moral part of it, I did my dissertation in moral theory, primarily because I was interested in the relationship between religion and morals. It's clearly not a one-to-one connection, right? I mean, it's not the case that every religious person is moral, or the opposite, that every moral person is religious, right? And yet, there are clear connections between the two. Somebody like, Thomas Jefferson, who was anything but a really religious Christian, he rewrote the New Testament, dropping everything having to do with Jesus. How do you like that kind of a New Testament? Anyway, Jesus as the Messiah is completely out of his version of the New Testament. Jesus as a rabbi is there, and so you get the Sermon on the Mount and things like that, right? But you don't get any assertions of Jesus being Messiah. And he thought that you needed to have religion in order for people to be moral, because that's how they learn how to be moral. Much later on, Dwight David Eisenhower said, I don't care what religion people have as long as they have a religion, because it's only with a religion that they're going to be moral, right? So there's a deep sense that somehow or another they're connected, even though it's clearly not a one-to-one connection. So my interest from very early on was, what's the relationship, both negatively and positively, between religion and morality? That's what, so the dissertation ultimately was in moral theory. Had nothing to do with anything practical, okay? And had nothing to do with anything Jewish either, actually. But then I moved here for what I thought was going to be 2 years. And Rabbi David Lieber, many of you will remember him, got me to come out and because I was also doing this doctorate as well as finishing rabbinical school. And so Marlon and I came out, and you may remember that David was as straight as an arrow and a lovely guy, but stupid he was not. He had us come out the third week in November. By which time in New York it was snowing, right? And here it was Indian summer, right? So I mean, and had me teach some classes and things like that. And after that, he said to me, well, what are you thinking of? So I said, well, I may do some academic stuff because I had the Stanford Fellowship, and that was primarily to get religious people into the secular bastion of the university, right? That's what Danforth wanted. The University of Judaism was not exactly a secular bastion, but anyway, I felt they had been immensely generous. They had paid tuition both at Columbia and at the seminary, and given us a living expense grant besides. I mean, they were immense. So I felt I owed it to them to try academic life. And so I said, well, maybe academia, but also a congregational rabbi. And so David said to me, well, if you're one or the other, it's better to start as in academia than it is the other way around. First, because you're going to earn less money in academia than you will in a congregation. And aside from that, in a congregation, you'll lose track of the journals and things like that, right? So start in academia. That was the winning argument. So that's why we came here for what was going to be 2 years, and then I was going to get serious and take a congregation to the Midwest where I had grown up. 53 years later, I've yet to get serious, right? That's one way to look at it. No, there was just no reason to leave, frankly. I mean, I love the teaching ever since first grade when Miss Burke asked me to take Tom out to the hallway and teach him how to read. And then in 5th and 6th grade, I did a lot of tutoring. In junior high school, I was president of the student body, and I started a tutoring program. In high school, I was president of Future Teachers of America. It's just in my blood. I love it. And so I'm still doing it, right? You know, it's actually when I turned 65, I said to Brad Artson, who's the dean, maybe I should retire so somebody younger than I could take this job. And he said to me, well, if some of your colleagues would say that to me, I would say, you're absolutely right, but I'm not saying that to you. So here I am at 81, still doing this, right? And the other thing is I had to decide, Marla and I met in my door, the counselor training program at Ramah, and we got married right after she finished college. We're 9 months apart, and we had our children early, so we went traveling a lot in our late 40s and 50s. So I didn't really want to do that anymore, and I had to decide what would I want to do when I retired, and the answer was teach. So here I am. So anyway, in this book, back to your question, I'm sorry. The way that I try to present it is that I really do think that there are lots of the Jewish tradition that attract me. I'll just say me personally, I would say for a lot of us. I mean, some of it is, well, one very interesting way to look at this. For many years, I was one of the founders of the Sandra Kaplan Community Bay Team, which deals with conversions. It's an interdenominational court for conversions, right? So I've been on the Bay Team for a lot of conversions. And when you hear what people, and you know, so a small percentage of the people who are converting because they want to marry a Jew. It's only about 20%. The rest are all converting for other reasons. So if you ask people, why do you want to become Jewish? I hear three things over and over again. What do you think I hear? Give me one thing that I hear. Pardon me? You want to be part of the chosen people. Well, there is a sense of, a very strong sense of family and community that non-Jews see in our community, in our faith. That's one reason. What's another? It's the only one that makes sense. The way they put it, the way that they put it is that you can ask any question, right? Which is, and in many other traditions, you can't, right? So those are two things. And then the third thing is, that they don't quite say that, but you're right. As Michael Birnbaum, has a wonderful line, Jews believe in at most one God, right? Go ahead, yes. Yes, and we're going to talk about that tonight, actually. You're not born in sin. The understanding of, well, the way that they put it usually is that Judaism seems to care about this life, right? Whereas Christianity and Islam care much more about life after death, right? And so people converting to Judaism, I mean, it's a really interesting window into our tradition, isn't it? I mean, what we take for granted, people who are not part of our tradition do not take for granted. And those are the three things that I hear over and over again as to why people want to become Jewish. Now, part of it is also what you just mentioned. And in the book, I start out with, I zoom out and I talk about a chapter on what does it mean to believe in God and what does it mean not to believe in God. I'll leave that for you to read. Then there's a chapter on the nature of human beings. Again, Jews tend to think that the whole world is Jewish, or at least that the whole world thinks the same way that we do, but it just ain't so.
So can you tell us a little bit about the Jewish perspective and non-Jewish perspective on the nature of the human being? Okay.
So as Americans, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. They're endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. And among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. To secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, right? That's the Declaration of Independence. Jefferson cribbed that from John Locke, who had written that about a century earlier. But Locke had said life, liberty, and property. And you can imagine how many doctoral dissertations have been written about why did Jefferson change it to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But in any case, as an American, I'm an individual with rights. And that's true in Enlightenment philosophy generally, so it's true in other Western cultures and countries as well. I have some duties because to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, so governments impose certain duties on us so that we can, in fact, enjoy those rights. Some of those duties are things like taxes, or when we're fighting a war, the selective service, or things on that order, right? But by and large, the burden of proof is on the government to show why I should not have a particular right. Okay? Now, from a Christian point of view, I am born into sin, right? And Paul in the New Testament says there's no salvation by works, so nothing that you can do in your life overcomes your sinfulness. The only way you can overcome your sinfulness is by believing in a supernatural intercessor, namely Jesus, who died for our sins. You know, in Jesus' death, we sinned all, right? And Jesus redeems us from our sins. But that means that, that if you, one of the people that just recently, actually, somebody was converting to Judaism. I said, why do you want to convert? And he said, because when I go to church, I hear about how sinful I am. And when I go to synagogue, I hear Shabbat Shalom. Now, again, you don't think in these terms, right? But from the outside, you really get a sense of how valuable this tradition is, right? So as an American, I'm an individual with rights. As a Christian, I would be, if I were a Christian, I would be somebody who is innately sinful in our DNA, as it were. That's what original sin means. It's sinful in our origins. Now, who am I as a Jew? All right, Jews, who am I as a Jew? Yes, I'm created in the image of God, and of course then the question is, what does that mean? We'll come back to that. Go ahead, yeah?
A rabbi.
Who am I? Yes, I am a rabbi, that's right, I'm sorry. No, I'm sorry, I didn't mean that. I didn't phrase the question well. How does the Jewish tradition understand the nature of the human being?
I think that's what he means, like that we all have the ability to teach.
Oh, we all have the ability to teach, yes. That's right, that's right. That's part of the image of God, and as well, I'll come back to that in a minute. But, pardon me? Yes, we are caretakers on earth, that's right. And we have the ability to do that because we have free will, right? We are born with Genesis 8 already says, Ki yetzer lev ha'adam ra min urav. The inclination of a person is evil from his youth. So that sounds like original sin, doesn't it? But that's not the way that the tradition understood it. We have a yetzer hara and a yetzer hatov, correctly translated, an inclination to do bad, an inclination to do good, but it's not as simple as that. Because the rabbis tell the story that at one point all of the righteous people in the world asked God to take away the yetzer hara. And then chickens did not lay eggs, and people did not get married and have children. They did not earn a living, all of these good things. Right? So the yetzer hara is the self-serving instinct in us, and the yetzer hatov is the altruistic instinct in us. And the rabbis already say that the yetzer hara, the self-serving instinct, is alive and well from the moment we're born. All you have to do is look at infants. We have very good information, by the way, that infants for the first 2 or 3 months of their lives don't even realize that mommy and daddy are separate from themselves. Right? They're just extensions of themselves in order to serve their needs, right? It takes 13 years, the rabbis say, to develop the yetzer hatov, the altruistic instinct, therefore bar mitzvah at that age, right? And then from that point on, it's a continual balancing act from 13 on, where the self-serving instinct and the altruistic instinct. And you need to have a balance of both. The rabbis actually, part of the reason why the self-serving instinct is called the yetzer hara is because you're more likely to do bad things to people in your own self-interest. Right? But you can be too altruistic also. The rabbis actually tell a story, I'll take it in just 1 minute, that the rabbis actually tell a story that there was a man who was so altruistic that on the day of his daughter's wedding, the court had to send emissaries to go with him for fear that he would give away her dowry on the way to the wedding. right? And I actually know of a couple who got divorced because he was always doing things for her and she felt that she could never catch up, right? You need, in relationships, it doesn't have to be exactly, equal, and it certainly doesn't have to be, everybody does the exact same things for each other. That's just not the way it works. But there does have to be some kind of reciprocity in any marriage and in any friendship, right? If there's going to be an ongoing kind of friendship. So we are born with a self-serving instinct and with an altruistic instinct, and they need to be balanced, one against the other, through our lives. And we have the free will to do that, and therefore the responsibility to do that. Right, I do a lot of interfaith work, and sometimes I tell Christians in particular, Judaism spells responsibility with a capital R, right? I still remember in the summer that Marlon and I met for the counselor training program. I was 18, Marlon was 17. The motto of the summer was achrayut, responsibility, right? Because the Jewish tradition really does impose a lot of responsibility on us, right? So I say to Catholics, right, that, we leave Egypt not as an individual, we leave as a community. And when we get to Sinai, we don't get a single right. We get 613 commandments, and that this is the beginning of Jewish guilt. At which point, the Catholics tell me, you have no idea what guilt is. We have that cornered, right? Right. I'll take them at their word. But anyway.
That really,
Yes.
you're taking us back, I think, to this distinction of what is the understanding of the human being or a Jew in Judaism versus a human being in secular America or in other religions.
Right.
And really those are almost in conflict in some ways.
As an American Jew, first of all, until the current administration, I'm very proud to be an American, okay? For a number of reasons. I mean, very seriously. First of all, because Jews have fared much better in America than in the vast majority of other nations, right? And a large part of that is individual freedom and the First Amendment and that kind of thing, right? Freedom of religion and all of that. Another piece of the reason why I'm very proud of it is because we are by far the most pluralistic society that has ever existed on the face of the earth. One of my priest friends, I've been part of the priest-rabbi dialogue since it's sponsored by the Archdiocese and the Board of Rabbis.
I didn't have to read the bio. I knew it would come out, all the different things that you're...
Fair enough. So my kids grew up thinking that you could not have a Passover Seder without a priest present. So one of my priest friends told me recently that in the Archdiocese of Los Angeles, Mass is offered in 80 different languages. 80, right? Not just Spanish and English.
80.
80 different languages. As a matter of fact, there's a Catholic church a couple blocks from my house, and if you look at the marquee, they have Maronite Rite. Maronite is from Lebanon. They have the Maronite Rite at 9 in the morning and 11 in the morning on Sunday, and if you want a straight thing, that has to be either at 10 or the night before, right? Because they do it in Arabic. So it's and now there have been a lot of bumps along the way, don't get me wrong. Slavery, for example, not a small one. And there's a lot of anti-Black things, a lot of anti-Jewish stuff along the way. But that said, if you look at the way that that minorities are treated in our society in comparison to how minorities are treated in other nations, ein mal hashvot, there's something, you can't compare them. I mean, in America, things are just, and that's what I'm really proud of, the pluralism of America. And then also the can-do part of America, right? The technological know-how and go west, young man, a long time ago, and go to the moon and be creative about everything, the arts and science and technology and everything else, right? So I'm very proud to be an American, but being an American and being a Jew are not always connected, and they're not always even in sync. My hometown rabbi used to love, there was a reading in the Silverman Siddur, which is also in Sim Shalom and is also in Lev Shalem. where you have a line from an American document and then another line from a Jewish document. The point of the reading is that America in it's called American rests on Jewish foundations. Right? Now, it's just not as simple as that. My hometown rabbi loved that. And frankly, in that generation, my parents' generation, American Jews really wanted to feel that they were American. Right? And so that reading got read every Friday night. And it was basically to reinforce the sense that, yes, we were Jews, but we were also, being Jews did not in any way, shape, or form diminish our American identity. Right? But they are different. And in some ways, well, to give you a sense of this, both in the Jewish tradition and in the American tradition, the individual is important, but for different reasons. In the American tradition, it's because we are endowed with inalienable rights, right? In the Jewish tradition, it's because we are each of us is created in the image of God. But notice, that's not obvious. In communist societies, individuals are not valued at all, right? And as a matter of fact, it's the community, well, hence the word communist, it's the community that takes precedence over all individuals. And so therefore you don't have the right to have individual expression or religion or whatever. And certainly in dictatorships, the same thing is true. Right? So the fact that we as Americans and as Jews have this sense that the individual is important for whatever reason is not obvious, right? And then the other piece of it is that America starts with rights and Judaism starts with duties, right? And sometimes rights and duties are reciprocal. So if I have a right to my jacket, you have a duty not to steal it, okay? But rights and duties are not always reciprocal. So that, I mean, my duties to my children were different from my duties to my parents, right? My duties to my country are different than my country's duties to me, right? So rights and duties are not always reciprocal. And in any case, if I get up in the morning and I'm an individual with rights, then the world owes me. But if I get up in the morning and I'm a member of a community with duties, then I owe the world. It's a whole different way of thinking about yourself, right? And this is part of the tension that exists in us, in American Jews, right? Because we inherit, and I think value, at least I value, both of those kinds of traditions. So the reason why I'm starting with this is because when we talk about specific moral issues, a lot of it is going to go back to how do you understand the individual in the first place, and also the community. In America, communities are completely voluntary, right? It's hard to become an American citizen, but if you are one, and if you have not committed a felony, you can go to any American consulate or embassy outside the United States, fill out a form, and renounce your American citizenship. And some Americans do that every year. Why do they do that? Taxes, yes. Exactly right. To avoid taxes, American taxes. But you have to, but it's a voluntary association, and you can renounce your American citizenship. If you're born Jewish or if you are reborn through the rites of conversion, right, and you then later become an apostate, that is, you become a devotee of some other religion, then as far as the Jewish tradition is concerned, you lose the privileges of being Jewish, but you still have all the obligations. Now, why is that the case? Because the way that the Jewish tradition understands us is organically. It's not a matter of, it's not a matter of volunteering to be part of this community. You are part of it, a part of this organism called the Jewish people. It's sort of like your foot cannot decide to leave you. Although mine tried one time when I broke my ankle hiking. That's another matter, right? But the point is that it's an organic sense of community that Judaism has, as opposed to a voluntary sense of community that's in the American tradition. And that's going to lead to a whole lot of different understandings of specific moral issues. So maybe we should do some moral issues.
So, exactly.
Wait, you had a question.
Oh, yes, Frank.
I just want to explore a little bit about the Yetzer Hara, the Yetzer Hara and the Yetzer Tov. I'm wondering, do you see it as essentially a spectrum, so that particular acts might be a mixture, a hybrid of both. And then I tend to discount not so much the extreme evil, because I've seen that. Not in my
No, I
personal
understand.
life, but I see it on
Yeah.
TV. You see, it happens. The extreme altruism exists, but I don't think many people practice like a purely altruistic act. It does happen.
Right.
So I think a lot of I guess I see it as a spectrum. I'm curious if you.
Yeah, I think it is. You're absolutely right. It's many of the things that we do are both and, right? You're doing it because you want to do it and because you're helping somebody else. So why do I teach, right? Why am I here tonight? Okay, let's start with that. Why am I here tonight? I'm here tonight because Rabbi Kornsgold asked me, right? I'm here and I promised. So I believe in keeping promises. I'm here tonight because I have some books and you might want to buy the books. I'm here
On the
tonight.
table right outside as
Outside,
you
that's right.
exit the room.
That's right. I'm here tonight because I love teaching, right? I'm here tonight because we have a caregiver for my wife. She has Parkinson's, and so on Wednesday night, and so there's a caregiver home, and so I'm able to come, right? I'm here tonight because you're paying me, by the way. I didn't even know that until recently. That's right. I didn't know that when I agreed. There you go. That's right.
Didn't know about it.
I
You
didn't-
know,
I
it
actually
was.
didn't.
Not running to do.
That's right. I didn't know about it until literally like 2 weeks ago or something. So that's, multiple reasons. Some of those are just because I love doing them, so it's for me. And some of them are because hopefully it's helping some other people as well, like the people in this room, hopefully. And similarly, anything you do for your family, in part it's for you, in part it's for the members of your family, right? It's and things that you do, with friends and even things that you do. Let's say you volunteer for the Sova Pantry. Jewish Family Service runs the Sova pantries for people who are deprived of food, right? And let's say you volunteer to do that one day, right? Now, why do you volunteer to do that? Maybe because you want to help others, right? Maybe because you want to think of yourself as somebody who would help others. Maybe because you're going with some friends and you want your friends to think of you as somebody who would help others, right? Maybe because you think that God requires it of you. How do you like that one? Or that your tradition requires it of you. Or maybe because your parents were that kind of people and they trained you to be that kind of people, right? I'm a past president of Jewish Family Service. My father was president of Jewish Family Service in Milwaukee, right? I didn't do it for that reason, but it's really sort of interesting that these things go through families, right? Multiple reasons. Most of the things we do in life are overdetermined. That is, it's not just one thing that leads you to do them. There may be one thing that you are most conscious of, but it's usually multiple reasons that lead you to do whatever it is you're doing. And some of those can be on the selfish end, and some can be on the altruistic end. And often the things we do are a mixture of the two. I think you're right. Absolutely.
So talking about kind of why do we do the things we do, and this question of sometimes we need a little bit of guidance as to what we're supposed to do when faced, especially with complicated moral questions and questions that come up that we don't necessarily think are complicated moral questions, but actually are.
Right.
I want to dive into a couple of scenarios because the way that your book is organized is that the first part of the book is more theory.
That's right.
Right? Zooming out.
Right.
And then, yes.
Yes.
And then you give us summaries of some of the many different tshuvot, the different halachic Jewish legal decisions that you've worked on.
Right.
And I want us to look at one, two of them tonight so that we get a taste of one, what is the process
Right.
of doing that type of work, and just so that we get to engage a little bit in one or two of those questions. So I would love to start us off with harmful communication. You have a chapter in here about harmful communication, but before, that's going to be our example. But before we go into the example, could you tell us a little bit about what's the process of working on one of these Jewish legal decisions, these tshuvot, these halachic decisions?
Right. So the first thing is you have to be asked the question, or you have to think that the question is important, right? So, I mean, part of the reason why I was interested in this is because, well, for 16 years I was rabbi in residence at Ramah here in California, and I noticed over the course of the 16 years that the swear words per sentence that the campers were saying immensely increased. Right? Hopefully not because I was there, but while I was there, right? Okay. And so I had conversations with 13, 14, 15-year-olds about what do swear words mean, right? What is the, and actually I had read an article in my freshman year of college about the point of which is that swear words in different cultures talk about the things that the culture is least comfortable with. So in America, it's about sex. That's Puritan America, right? So swear words are about sex. In Germany, and I actually checked this out, we had 2 rabbinical students from Germany. In Germany, swear words are about bathroom functions. And in Italy, swear words are about the church. So the point is, if you're talking about sexual swear words, what is this saying about how you think about your body? Because remember, in the Jewish tradition, the sexual parts of your body are just as much created by God as your mind or your heart or your lungs, right? And so what you're doing when you use swear words to diss somebody, as it were, to disrespect somebody, is you're also disrespecting God that created them, right? Now, this I must say, I'm talking about 14 and 15-year-olds, all right? This was a kind of conversation that was, in many cases, did not work for them. But what did work for them is that if you use swear words every other sentence, then when you really want to use a swear word to make a point, nobody will pay attention. That's verbal inflation, right? And so if you really want swear words to make the point, I don't think you need, I say this very honestly, I don't think you need a swear word to make a really intense point. But if you think you do, then you need to use them very sparingly, because otherwise nobody will think that anything's different now. And people will not be your friends because you use swear words. They will be your friends despite the fact that you use swear words, right? That will not be an attraction. So it's anyway, so that's how it began, my interest in language, in this kind of language. But then also, I was I'm aware of a lot of bullying that goes on, and it used to be just within a few people, but now it's on the internet, and it becomes viral within seconds and really destructive, right? And you also get other kinds of lying, fake news, that kind of stuff, right? Where you can't if you can't distinguish the difference between truth and falsity, you can't live. I mean, because you really don't know, and you don't know what to trust or in whom to trust if there's no distinction between lying and telling the truth. But you also have to deal with other pieces of language. I mean, things like one of the chapters is on writing letters of recommendation, right, for either schools or jobs. So, I mean, as I say at the beginning of that chapter, if you look at the Jewish tradition, the first thing that you would say is, it's easy, just tell the truth. But it's not so easy, because you also have and here's where, again, the Jewish tradition is very different from the American tradition. In the American tradition, there's libel and slander.
We have a few lawyers sitting here.
Yes, that's right.
Just some,
That's right, okay? But in the Jewish tradition, it's much more nuanced than that. there's also a thing called lashon hara, speech about the bad of somebody. And you're not supposed to say negative things about somebody else unless there's a reason for the hearer to know it. So in the case of somebody getting a letter of recommendation for a job, let's say, the potential employer does need to know both the pluses and minuses of this person's skill set in order to be able to do the job, right? Now, you may want to say that this person is really good at these kinds of things and needs some help with this, but could be helped with these interventions, right? But you have to be honest about both the strengths and the weaknesses of this person's candidacy, right? So when I first presented this to the Committee on Jewish Law and Standards, one of the people said, "But you're going to get sued." So one of the lay people on the committee, Mark Gary, who's a lawyer, wrote part of the original tshuva, in which he talked about American law in terms of protecting yourself from being sued if you say something negative in a letter of recommendation, right? But it goes even further than this in the Jewish tradition. Not only are you not allowed to say lashon hara unless there is a practical reason for the hearer to know, you're also not allowed to say avak lashon hara, the dust of lashon hara. What is that? I'll give you an example. This time he got it right. Now, it sounds like a positive statement, right? But it implies that every other time he didn't get it right. So you're not allowed to say even avak lashon hara, right? Now, on the other hand, you're also supposed to engage in tact, right? And so there is this thing, the Catholics call it a white lie. There's a lie that you tell in order to preserve somebody's feelings, okay? Who is the first one in the Torah to tell a white lie? Abraham, how so? No, you're on the right story, but the wrong person.
Or the wrong character.
Oh, the story, you're talking about Abraham and Sarah, right? But who tells the white lie? It's God, right? Because God talks to Sarah first, and she says, "My husband is too old to have a baby." And then then God goes to Abraham, and he doesn't tell him that Sarah said that he was too old. God says that Sarah thought that she was too old to have a baby. Ladies and gentlemen, the first white lie in the Torah, okay? Pardon me?
What,
There was an early one?
An
Okay, go
earlier
ahead.
example.
Go ahead, yes.
God said if you ate the fruit of the tree,
Yes.
and I mean, longer term, maybe that
Well, the Garden of Eden story, it depends on how you read it, right? But I mean, if you look at, it's basically, the anthropologists call it an etiological myth. That is a story to try to explain why things are as they are and how they got to be that way. So how is it that we human beings have knowledge of good and bad? Because Adam and Eve ate of the tree of knowledge of good and bad, right? And therefore we are able to discern the difference. But they were kicked out of the garden before they could eat of the tree of life because to show that, and that's because we are mortal, right? We don't live forever. So the story is there to explain certain aspects, of who we are. And by the way, when I talk to Catholics in particular about, or Christians generally about, about original sin, they say to me, well, what about Adam and Eve? I said, yeah, we have that story too. But, Adam and Eve sinned, and that was their problem. It's not mine, right? And that for them, I mean, never mind. Yes, go ahead.
On the subject that you were talking about, did you see the movie Conclave yet?
Oh, which movie?
Conclave.
No, I did not.
Oh, you need to see that.
CONFLATE, conflate? Huh? Oh, conclave.
Yeah.
No, I didn't know.
Very interesting to see how.
Oh, it's about the popes? Is that what everyone?
Bingo.
Yes.
And you talk about people running to do evil and suggesting people for jobs.
Oh, wow.
Right, they
You'd
could have
you'd find
used
it
you
fascinating.
an advisor of sorts. So I want to bring us back a little bit to the example in this book that you give, and just how, walk us through a little bit this idea of harmful communication. And you started by saying you might think that in Judaism the idea is just tell the truth.
Right.
Then other things happen, right?
And so now part of it is, I wrote a first draft, okay? And then it goes to, we have a subcommittee. The Committee on Jewish Law and Standards consists of 25 rabbis and 5 lay people. The 25 rabbis are chosen by the president, chosen by the president of the Rabbinical Assembly. Each term is for 5 years. So the terms of 5 members expire each year, and they can either be reappointed or new people can be appointed. And the same sort of thing in terms of the lay people. The president of the United Synagogue appoints somebody, and that's how it works, okay? Both the rabbis and the lay people on the committee are not bashful. They're Jews after all. And so what happens is that, and by the way, usually many of the lay people have been lawyers, so including 2 deans of, including 2 deans of law schools we've had on the Committee on Jewish Law and Standards. Anyway, so the first draft gets talked about by a subcommittee. And then, as if I'm the author, then I get to change things based upon the input that I got from the subcommittee. And then it goes to the full committee, and we go around the room where people say, well, why'd you say this, and shouldn't you say that, and what about this? It's a free-for-all, okay? Very respectful. I mean that very seriously. Even one of the proudest moments I think I had in the conservative movement generally, but in the Committee on Jewish Law and Standards in particular, was when we were debating the gay and lesbian issues, right? Where the debate was really very heated, but never personal. It was never, you're crazy for believing this or anything like that, right? It was always on point. And so even in the most heated discussions, one of the things that I really am proud of in terms of the conservative movement is that we've managed to be respectful of each other, even when we disagree. So anyway, you get that kind of input.
Which is connected to this tshuva.
Yes.
Of not only writing a tshuva about harmful or not harmful communication,
right,
but may our institutions model this as well.
There you go, right on. Hadn't thought of it that way, you're right. So then, the author takes it back, and I have always felt that the people that are making suggestions are in my corner. I always have loved, I've written a lot of stuff, and I've always loved the things that I have written after they've been edited by someone else or critiqued by somebody else and then revised, much better than my first draft. There's no point in getting defensive. They're helping you make a better product, right? And the Committee on Jewish Law and Standards has very much done that in terms of a lot of the tshuva that I've written. I don't think a single one of them is on the first draft, right? They're all, a second, it's usually only the 3rd time around that a vote is taken, right? Because more things people think about other pieces of this. So for example, in regard to Lashon Hara, so Rabbi Susan Grossman, I remember, was on the committee, said, well, what about politicians, right? Don't you have a right, not only a right, but a duty to point out what you think is dangerous, or at least not wise, in terms of what a particular politician is running on, the platform they're running on, right? Or if they're in office, don't you have the duty to criticize, right? So how do you balance that with respect for persons? Well, one can criticize with respect, and one can, and you need to do that, again, on point in terms of what the issue is, as opposed to, you're stupid, you're a loser, you're whatever, right? That's not allowed, right? But the position you're taking has the following problems with it.
Which is connected also to tochacha.
Yes, that's
to
right.
rebuke, which is part of this distinction you speak about but in harmful communication versus communication that is there to encourage better behavior.
That's right. As a matter of fact, in the Torah itself, it's this is Leviticus 19. Do not hate your brother in your heart, but rather rebuke your brother and love your neighbor as yourself. It's the same two lines, right, in Leviticus 19. So the idea is you're not supposed to bear a grudge, and you're not supposed to take vengeance. This is all in the same section of Leviticus 19. You're not supposed to hate your brother in your heart, but rather rebuke your brother where it's necessary and love your neighbor as yourself. In order to be able to love your neighbor as yourself, you have to be able to say when that neighbor is not doing things right or doing something that should be done differently.
In the appropriate way.
In the appropriate way, which means, first of all, in private and in constructive criticism. I first learned this as a counselor at Camp Ramah, my first summer, right? And Ramah, Wisconsin is an 8-week summer, and there's with Parents' Day in the middle, right? And so the night before Parents' Day, there was a meeting of all the counselors, and we were told, you don't say that Johnny is terrible, right? You say that Johnny does some really good things in these areas. He's got something to work on in these areas, but he's really good in that. It's a sandwich, right? Because if parents are not going to hate you and even listen to you, it's got to be put into that kind of a sandwich environment, right? The other piece of it is that it really has to be directed. Whatever criticism, and by the way, whatever praise also should be directed to the specifics that garner the praise. Because if it's just, and I've read a lot of admissions essays for rabbinical school and also for when we had an undergraduate program. Blanket praise doesn't really, it's nice, somebody thinks really well of somebody, but it's much more important if the person says, this person really is good at this, this, and this. Right? Where we get a real sense that the person who's writing the recommendation really knows this person. Right? So you don't want just blanket praise. You want some specifics, but you also, if there are going to be some problems in this person being a student or this person on their job, then you want to know what those problems are. And also, as the recommender, you might suggest certain ways in which the job might help that person do well in the job, right? And you also have to be very careful about what you don't know. So I get, because I teach in rabbinical school, I get a lot of questions from synagogues and other schools, all kinds of places where our graduates are applying for a job. So I have to say to the people, some of the things, let's say for a congregation, some of the things you want to know, I don't know anything about. I've never heard this person give a sermon. I've never seen this person manage a budget. I've never seen this person do a funeral, right? What I can tell you, and for those kinds of things, you have to, or teach a course, right? For those kinds of things, you have to talk to people who have seen this person in those settings. What I can tell you about is what I do know about this person from the way in which I know this person. In the classroom and in conversations outside the classroom, and long ago if I saw them work at Ramah or something like that, right? So I could tell them the things that I knew. But one of the things that the rabbis themselves say is get used to saying, I don't know.
Which is also part of your process that you have worked so much in, not just writing tshuvot, not just writing these legal responses in the silo of Judaism, but bringing in other folks who have different forms of knowledge. Right? Whether it's doctors, if you're writing about medical ethics, whether it's lawyers, if you're right? That yes. Part of the process is that engagement with other forms of knowledge.
Right, which I think is really important because one of the things that I love about the Jewish tradition is that, I love many things about it, but another one of the things that I love about it is that it really is interested in gaining knowledge from all quarters. As a matter of fact, even somebody like Rabbi Samson Raphael Hirsch, who was the 19th century rabbi who created modern Orthodoxy, it was modern Orthodox because he was saying that young German Jews could go to the university and learn all kinds of things that they would learn at the university, as long as they understood that if there was something that contradicted what's in the Torah takes precedence, because the Torah is given by God, and what you learn in the university was created by human beings. But he himself says that revelation comes in two forms. Revelation comes in interpreting the text of the Torah, and it comes in doing science, because God created the world. So when you are doing science, you are learning more about what God intended for us, living in this on this planet. So the tradition never really had, with the exception of Spinoza, and which I'll get to in a moment if you want, we never really had heresy trials in the same way that the Christians did, right? Because it's you're really supposed to delve into things, and you're supposed to try to find out what's true. And one of the ways that I very often put it is that the rabbis preferred truth over consistency. In other words, if some things they found to be true didn't hang well together, that didn't bother them. They it might have bothered them, but they preferred to stick with what they had found to be true, even if it didn't fit nicely into some schema, right? Whereas the Greeks preferred consistency over truth in certain ways, right? Plato in particular, but that's a whole other, and then later Hegel, really prefers consistency over truth. And Kant to a certain extent also. So where the Jewish...
Now we're getting into, you've
Yes.
got these different parts of your background.
Right,
You know, got a philosophy, and then we also have, so many different things. But I want to, I'm looking at the time, and
Go ahead.
I have one or two more questions
Go
for you
ahead,
that I
sure.
want to make sure we get to.
Sure.
One is, when I'm going through the different Tshuvot that you have as examples in here, because really, it's kind of like a highlights book
Right.
of your work.
That's right.
Of the last 50 years.
Right.
Right. This is really what this is. If you want to get an idea of what have you been up to
Right,
for many
That's right.
decades, you got this book right here.
Right.
Exactly. Best hits, a highlights book. And part of it is seeing what are the major themes that keep coming up when you are approaching a question in our tradition.
Yeah.
And I would love to hear, what do you think are the main themes?
Well, the main themes, I think, at least as I interpret the tradition and as I apply it, and I talk about this toward the beginning of the book, are two things. One is what I call epistemological humility. In other words,
Please
humility about what any human being can know. God may be omniscient, but no human being is. And I think it's really important to develop a certain sense of humility. It doesn't mean you shouldn't try to learn as much as you possibly can about whatever the topic is. You should, right? But even once you've done that, then you really need to understand that, it may look that way to you now, and it may look that way to all of the experts now, but it may not look that way, later on, right? The vast, to give you a case in point, the vast majority of humanity believed until Copernicus that the sun went around the earth, right? Oh, is it? Is it really? Oh, I didn't know that. Okay, fair enough. And the vast majority of people believed that the world was flat. Okay, so and these were really smart people at the time. So we believe certain things now, and we have very good evidence for it. We have the scientific method and all of that, right? But it may be that when we learn from Hubble et al. Things about other planets, and that what is very clear to us now is not so clear when we learn more. So I think we need to have a certain amount, each of us certainly individually. I've been privileged to be on 3 federal commissions and 1 state of California commission on issues in healthcare. Well, Hillary Clinton's healthcare task force, may it rest in peace, and then the Surgeon General's task force to diminish the spread of sexually transmitted diseases, and then NARPAC, National Human Resources Protections Advisory Commission. This was in the waning months of the Clinton administration and the first 2 years of the W administration, to review and revise the federal guidelines on research on human beings. This is after Jesse Gelsinger, a young Jewish guy actually, who died of a medical experiment at the University of Pennsylvania, and Ellen Roach, 24-year-old young woman who died of a medical experiment at Hopkins. And so that's what led to the creation of NARPAC. And I must say, the people on these commissions were really smart. I mean, and if you ever needed to be humble, to have a sense of humility, just sit in a room with some of these people and, what do I know, right? I mean, it's really that. But I think that's really important. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't seek to know things, and it certainly doesn't mean you should not distinguish truth from falsity. But it does mean, I think, that you need to have a certain amount of epistemological humility about what you can know and what other people's experiences are. When I was growing up, 15 years old, that same summer, 3 of the girls in the Machon asked me to teach them how to read Torah, which I did, even though I had no clue where they would use the skill. Because girls were not allowed to read Torah in my synagogue or at Ramah, right? I guess I was an early feminist or something. But anyway, I had no clue with that, right? Much later on, when the gay and lesbian thing came up, I mean, I didn't know that I knew any gay people when I was growing up. I may have known them, but I didn't know that I knew them, right? And then, things happened, not Stonehenge, what was pardon me? Stonewall, that's right, the Stonewall Inn, that's right, in 1969, which I didn't really know about because Marlon and I were accompanying a U.S. WAG trip to Israel that summer. But when I came back, I learned about it. And then in 1973, my third year here, I got a call from a friend of mine who was a rabbi in Cleveland. And he told me that a young man who had grown up in his congregation and actually had been the regional president of USY, had gone on a joint program to the Jewish Theological Seminary in Columbia. And in the spring of 1973, the spring of his sophomore year, he came out as a gay man, and he was shunned by the seminary community, and so he had transferred to UCLA. And the rabbi asked me to speak with him to tell him that the Jewish tradition still cared about him. Now, I must tell you, I knew one line in Leviticus. That's all I knew about it, right? And he taught me what it was like to be a committed conservative Jew that was shunned by some of not only the texts of the tradition, but some of the members of the community, right? It was only later on that I was, because of the stuff I do at UCLA Medical Center, I was on the AIDS task force when AIDS was first identified in 1981, and AIDS began as a heterosexual disease in Africa. But in the United States, it started out primarily as a gay man's disease. So I came to know a lot of gay men and was actually part of the founding thing of Nechama, it's called. It was part of the Jewish Family Service and then became part of the Federation. On Sunday mornings, in the Hirsch Kosher Kitchen on Fairfax, we created meals for AIDS patients and their caregivers. Right, and we were. This was the early 1980s, in which I came to know a lot of gay men, and so when the Committee on Jewish Law and Standards began to talk about this in January of 1989, I still remember this. I was the only one around the table, I think, who had any experience whatsoever with gay men or with lesbian women. Right. But I didn't have all that much experience, right? And so it was. I think one needs to understand the limits of one's knowledge, and both in terms of science and technology and literature and history, everything else, right? But also in terms of people's personal experiences, right? You have your own personal experiences, and Well, the first time I really got a sense of this was when my senior year in college, when it became clear that I was going to go to rabbinical school. My aunt, who had worked for Jewish Family Service in Milwaukee for 30 years, said, you really should take a course on marriage and family so that you understand that people's marriages and families are not like yours, like the one that you grew up in. I mean, I had terrific parents and all of that. And so I took a course in a part of the catalog I'd never seen before, taught by a marriage counselor, a woman, a gynecologist, obstetrician, a man, and a psychologist, a man. And the three of them would sit in front of the room, and we would talk about different ways that families operate. And, what's healthy and what's not, and how do you help people have healthy families and all of that kind of stuff, right? But, that was my first introduction to, I knew that I had friends who came from families that were that were not really problematic, but not nearly as supportive as my own. And then I also, I started college in 1961, and President Kennedy said, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. So on Thursday afternoons in college, I was in Harlem teaching 7th graders who were reading on a 2nd grade reading level, right? And these kids, I remember one boy in particular, who he was the oldest in the family. The father was long gone. That was true for a lot of these kids. So the mother was working several jobs. He had to buy the groceries, but he couldn't read. So he figured out what was in the cans based upon the pictures in the cans, which I thought were there to entice you to buy the product. He had a job after school to take a .22 caliber pistol and shoot rats on the roofs of apartment buildings. And I remember saying to myself, when I was born and when he was born, I was not morally superior to him. I was just lucky, right, to be born into a family that could put food on the table and a roof over my head. And I went to a public school. 1st grade, they took us to the library. We got a library card. We had to take out 2 books. We had to read them and create some kind of book report. 2 weeks later, they marched us back to return those books and get others. There was a very good public library about 2 blocks from this junior high school. These kids had no clue of it and couldn't use it anyway because they couldn't read. So, it's then when I came to see that my experience was my experience and incredibly lucky in a lot of ways. Whereas, and you need to, if you're going to be real about people, and real about what kinds of moral guidelines we should be having for people, you have to know the kinds of contexts in which people live.
So number
So
one. That's one.
Thank you. Epistemological humility. The other one comes directly from that. The other is gratitude. I think Rabbi Abram Joshua Heschel, alav shalom, thought that awe and wonder were the primary, the central Jewish emotions, central Jewish religious emotions. I think awe and wonder are certainly there, but I think gratitude is much more central. That's the first thing we're supposed to say in the morning when we get up. Modeh ani lefanecha. I thank you, God, that you returned my soul to me, my consciousness to me, my life breath to me, actually, right? Nishmati b'chemla. 3 times a day in the Modim section of the Amidah, we thank God for our lives and for your miracles that are with us each day. They're with us each day. So that's not a miracle in the sense of an interruption in the law of nature. That's the fact that nature is such that we're able to live and maybe even thrive, right? So I frankly think, and all of these blessings, we're supposed to say, thank God for 100 blessings a day, right? And then we're also supposed to, hakarat hatov, we're supposed to thank people who do things for us, right? So I frankly think that gratitude is much more central to the Jewish tradition than awe and wonder. And by the way, I think Heschel got the awe and wonder stuff from Rudolf Otto, who was a Protestant theologian. And in Protestant Christianity, awe and wonder may be the central thing, but I think in Judaism, gratitude is. So those are the 2 leitmotifs that go through all of what I've done: epistemological humility and a sense of gratitude.
Thank you. With that, I think we're going to come to a close, and I think that's a good place for us to end. One, of course, for us to have gratitude, and I think all of us sit here feeling the humility of sitting in your presence and being able to learn from you. So thank you.
Appreciate it.
And I recommend this book so much. We have copies outside, but also it is a book that if you have a question, it might be in here. Whether it is something that you are thinking about, whether it's, we didn't get to a lot of the things, but, you know, ethics of war, you've got a chapter in here. So many relevant topics that we are facing on a daily basis are right here. So thank you for this gift. Thank you for joining us this
And
evening.
yes, I will sign.
Yes.
Very specific thank you, and you might want to hear this.
I will.